Hey, and we're back to First Chronicles. So like 1 and 2, 3 and 5, 3 to 5 is still a whole bunch of genealogies, and I hope you're still keeping an open mind and looking out for those new information that are contained in this that weren't in the genealogies that we had seen previously. So what I did notice, or the lessons I learned, was that David was the focus of all the descendants of the tribe of Judah. He had 6 sons born to him in Hebron, where he reigned for 7 years and 6 months. And he also had nine sons born to him in Jerusalem, where he reigned for 33 years. He also had other sons by concubines, with an S, and a daughter named Tamar. The descendants of Solomon ruled as kings of Judah during the time when the kingdom was divided, and only legitimate descendants were listed in Solomon's genealogy. In chapter 3, verse 19, we see Zerubbabel mentioned. He was the civil leader of the Jews in Jerusalem after they had returned from exile, and featured prominently in the books of the prophets. In prophets Hagar, Zechariah, and Ezra, you'd hear Zerubbabel. I'm sure the name is familiar. He never became king over Israel, but he was a representative of David's eternal throne for the returned exiles. Now, in chapter 4:9, we meet Jabez, whose name means pain or sorrow, and his name suddenly comes up in the middle of the listing of the family of Judah. And I was wondering that why, you just, and remember we've seen the genealogy of Judah before, and we didn't see Jabez, right? So his name means sorrow or pain, like I said, and he was an honorable man, it tells us, and he sought God. He asked God to keep him from pain, essentially asking God to do something opposite to who he was, or to what the expectation of his name was. His mom named him Jabez because she bore him in pain, and he's asking God, to do a reversal of that. And he also asked God to enlarge his territory, possibly, since we're talking about land, possibly, about giving him more land. And God answered him and granted his request. Now we met someone called Bethea, the wife of Mered. She was the daughter of a pharaoh. Now, for a Hebrew to marry an Egyptian, and not just an Egyptian royalty, was quite curious and interesting in that time. It was possible that it was done for some sort of military alliance, or, to I don't know, but also perhaps it was because of the links that Joseph had to the Egyptians. Remember, Joseph did come from the, Egyptian pharaoh line, kind of. Well, we all know Joseph's story, so that was one fact I thought was interesting. The inheritance of Simeon was within Judean territory, and they never outgrew Judah. Instead, they kept shrinking until they were incorporated into Judah. We already spoke about this, about the curse that, Jacob gave on Simeon because of, what he did. And that was in Genesis 3:41. Yeah. The prophecy was about Levi as well, so it was Simeon and Levi who, obviously we know the story, because of their sister, went and killed the Shechemites. And his curse to Levi was that he would be scattered. And to be honest, we see that Levites are scattered around. They weren't given any territory, even though God redeemed them and made them his priests. Reuben lost his firstborn rights, including the double portion of his inheritance. That was in Deuteronomy 2:11, because he slept with his father's concubine. It was given to Joseph. Now, in spite of his sin, his descendants were blessed with flocks and herds in the Transjordan area. If you remember, they had one of the 3 Transjordanian tribes. The Hagrites, this was interesting, were descendants of Hagar. I remember Hagar was Ishmael's mom, and enemies of the Transjordanian tribes. In chapter 5:20, the Transjordanian tribes came together and carried out a battle, but they were in battle, but they cried out to God together in battle, and he heard them because they trusted him, and he gave them victory against the Hagrites, which increased their flocks. And just so they were blessed, victorious, and they got increase. But their leaders, in spite of all this, ended up in idolatry, and God raised up their enemies, the king of Assyria, and he carried them, that's the tribes of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, into captivity, because this was the king of Assyria. And in those days, Assyria, their method of dealing with conquered nations was to just scatter them throughout the land, and that's what happened to these tribes. What lesson did you learn about God here? So here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. God responds to prayers. In this chapter, we see how Jabez, who was the opposite of his name, will cause pain, called on the Lord with a plea, and God answered him and blessed him. Also, we saw the Transjordanian tribes come together and carry out a battle against the Hagrites, asking God for victory, and he gave them victory. Isn't it amazing how the all-knowing God granted the request of a people when he knew they would turn away from him after he gave them what they asked for? So remember the Transjordanian tribe, after doing all that God did for them, their leaders still went into idolatry, and God didn't stop doing it. He knew they would do this, and he didn't stop that. He didn't not answer their plea. God doesn't despise our prayers, whether selfish or God-focused. As long as we know God, trust him, and acknowledge him as our source, we shouldn't feel condemned or pulled away from him, when instead we should pray. So no matter what it is, just pray. No matter how far away you feel like you are from God, pray. He answers you. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we're going back into the Psalms, and I'll be sharing lessons from Psalms 73, 78, and 77. So 76, 3, 7, and 8. See you here.